Alright guys, so we only have a couple days left to convince the Senate not to pass this new terrifying FISA law that will force U.S. businesses, not only that, but it also mentions, at least according to Elizabeth Goitin, it can also force individuals to act as NSA spies. That's pretty concerning. So I encourage anyone in the U.S. especially to call this number, to contact your senator right away and tell them not to pass this. They actually added some additional things to this FISA, and we're going to go over this article real quick on Wired. And if you note, I'm actually reading it in an I2P browser setup, so if you're interested in reading Wired and many other sites, you can do that right inside the I2P browsing setup in a more private way. So if you want to read articles like this, of course you can read it right in Tor browser, but you can also read it right inside an I2P browser setup. I think the most alarming part is the fact that they may allow and force companies of all different forms to act as spies for them. And of course, that would likely be done under some sort of a gag order, so they may have to turn over hardware for their routers and their computers, their servers, if they run any kind of service, as they call it, the Stasi provision, and they also refer to it as the make everyone a spy provision. And it really does have, Stasi-like implications, just how the Stasi had neighbor spying on neighbor. We are seeing this come to fruition right in the U.S. And if we're seeing it happen in the U.S., you can bet that pretty much every other country is going to be willing to do the same. Now, one thing is, Biden appears to be very, very supportive of mass surveillance. And I actually covered this recently, how he took credit for writing the Patriot Act. And we all love the Patriot Act. I mean, it's called the Patriot Act. It's got to be patriotic, am I right? Truly, it does appear like Biden is all for this type of mass surveillance, and he seems to really relish in the power and his closeness to the intelligence community and the profit interests that gather there. We can take a look back at an old James Banford article, and what's interesting now, when you hear them say we don't spy on U.S. citizens, maybe they're right. Maybe they don't spy on U.S. citizens. If you recall the video of James Clapper when he was asked, do you spy on U.S. citizens? And you know what he answered? He said, not wittingly. Well, if you read further into it, and some of these older articles, this one's from 2016, but I also saw several articles from the early 2000s, around 2006 as well, where it talked about how might someone spy on their own people while at the same time saying they're not. Well, that's what friends are for, am I right? It looks like there may be some kind of a deal to get unfiltered U.S. data and sending it over to Israel. I guess that would make it that they aren't spying. If you have your friends do it, I guess technically you're not lying about that. And apparently it was one of the things that upset Snowden most, was finding out that they were actually not only, collecting this domestic data, but that they were turning it over to a foreign country in order to allow them to actually do the actual spying on that data, allowing them to have that plausible deniability I'm always talking about that is required in these kinds of operations where the point is not to admit wrongdoing or any kind of accountability. And apparently some members of that secret Israeli military organization, Unit 8200, even wrote to Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is back in 2016. I also came across another Bamford article called The Spy Factory is a book he wrote, and this article was in relation to that. And I found that pretty fascinating, so you might want to look that up as well. James Bamford does some really excellent work, so if you have an interest in learning more about the way these kinds of things work, take a look at James Bamford's work. Done some really great stuff there. Now, what are the repercussions of this? When you force companies and you force people to act as spies for a national security spy agency, what does that do to those companies? So, I mean, does anyone really care? Well, it doesn't appear that the IC community cares, at least not at the top, and not those who run the contractors who make the billions of dollars per year doing this. And it does look like that there was some serious abuse, which they admit there was serious abuse when you have, agencies have to police themselves in some way. As with the FBI, they mentioned how much abuse happened with FISA, and now they're looking to pass it and expand on it to force individuals and small businesses even to cooperate and act as actual spies. That truly is Stasi level stuff. And I just can't understand how someone can have that much hunger for this level of surveillance. Like, there's nothing good about it. Nothing good. And I really have a hard time believing that it is good people even behind these kinds of agendas. I mean, I just can't imagine. Why would you want to put your grandchildren under the kind of boot that has complete access not only to the data, but also to forcing individuals and small businesses to act as spies? What kind of a good person would come up with that or even support it? I have a really hard time believing it, that it is by good people. I would love to be proven wrong. Maybe there's something we're all missing, but according to reports, this hasn't even stopped terrorism. So what's the real point? Of course, it all started out as, we're going to use this to fight terrorism only. And then, of course, after that, we saw it move into, oh yeah, we need to stop those dangerous drugs. So, we need domestic surveillance, of course, because you can't stop those dangerous drugs without putting everyone under 24-hour monitoring. Oh, and while you're at it, we have access to this data. Might as well make it useful. Let's go after cybercrime. We have all this network data at all these undersea cables tapped. Why not go after cybercrime? Well, I don't see it being that far-fetched to think that these very companies that are helping and assisting with this may very well go as far with artificial intelligence automating everything. I would not be surprised if they eventually come after people who may, spit something out on the sidewalk or whatever other silly law that they can go after, for tax revenue. I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, you have artificial intelligence automating everything. What's to stop you? I'd say nothing. And I think we're going to be seeing that kind of thing. We already have seen how they have already abused it. The FBI has scoured the wiretap database for information on journalists, political donors, protesters, and even sitting members of Congress. Now, of course, the Congress wanted to ensure they had a nice little way out of this. So, of course, I believe, if I remember right, they need some kind of a warrant to actually spy on Congress. How convenient. So the people who are voting for these bills, they aren't at the same, level of snooping. Even Senator Wyden's calling the power that they're asking for absolutely terrifying. And I tend to agree. Under the current law, of course, they can compel the electronic communication service providers, which is basically ISPs and Google, things like that, big companies, Yahoo, things like that. And we saw all of this in the Snowden leak. So we saw that these corporations actually were on the flowcharts. They were on all of the Microsoft Office presentations, we saw that there's active or at least passive in that case. But this is much more dangerous because this is actually forcing them to be a more active partner in this. So, it doesn't go much further than this to be able to compel and force individuals and small businesses to, and when I say individuals, I'm saying any individual who provides any kind of service can be forced to assist in this mass surveillance as long as they have access to the equipment on which the communications are transmitted or stored. Well, I mean, that can sometimes work. It all depends on the type of setup. I mean, if something stores data, of course, it can be, sifted through. But then there's also, different systems that don't store data. So, I would expect some sensitive providers may actually start running live-based servers where they don't actually store any data. And that would be one way to protest against something like this. Now, I don't know if that's legal, so I'm not suggesting it, of course. And it's alarming that we have to feel the need to stop ourselves when we speak, that we have to think about this. Now, because of the level of mass surveillance, we have to actually consider how our words can be misconstrued and twisted to be used to paint us in a bad light. Everything is being watched constantly. It's also the natural reaction to guard yourself, to not speak out, to be afraid to speak the truth to power because the power is monitoring you and has a history of abuse of that. So for anyone who signs to pass this, I think you can pretty much say they're probably compromised in some way, whether it's their own financial investments and interests that may go along with this, or they're somehow involved at a deeper level, or maybe further than that. I'm really not sure. The whole point is there's this provision, really, the FISA court took a unusual step of sounding a public alarm. That's saying something. That these, provisions will actually encompass hotels, libraries, coffee shops. I mean, we already knew that libraries were being asked to perform some forms of spying on their, customers and their visitors. So we already knew that kind of thing. I remember post 9/11 when they were talking about the Patriot Act and all these things, they were forcing, the forced spying on customers, the forced information collection for financial institutions, the, know your customer stuff, the KYC stuff, all of that. And, now we have this. We have this wonderful, wonderful FISA amendment, which wishes to be able to force anyone, and that is anyone. I see a lot of warrant canaries coming out in the future on different sites, being that this is just, truly is Stasi-like. Is it about AI? I know that there's been a lot of talk that there needs to be a lot more surveillance in order to further compete with China on AI. I've seen reports on that and Freedom of Information Act documents as well. So public documents. Now, like I said, gag order. So none of the people or businesses that provide a service would even be allowed to tell anyone about the assistance they were compelled to provide. So they would be under the gag order, and that was what I thought might have happened. Just because this is just historically how it goes, if anyone is part of this or court ordered by secret courts where they also have secret prisons, this stuff is alarming as it gets. And, I don't consider this without risk talking about it. But I think it's just so important that, and we already know that activists, journalists are targeted for daring to speak out. And, how much farther can this go? I hope you're reading this. I hope that you are also sharing this video. Make sure to share the video, because if you don't share the video, some people may not find out about it. And if you do share the video, we have a much better chance of extra people calling who actually may make a difference, who may actually convince their senators. So make sure to share this video. These kinds of videos on this kind of mass surveillance aren't well promoted by the algorithm, unfortunately. Just the way it is, not sure why. But the point is, really, really, really encourage you to share this video and, of course, to call your senator and just make sure they don't pass this bill. This is an unbelievable amount of power, and they also approved themselves another extension for another year of surveillance powers. So yeah, like Elizabeth says, there's no reason to create the surveillance state. They've already done enough. They've already broken enough businesses, as Bamford's article talks about here. People don't even trust American businesses, all because of the mass surveillance. I mean, why would they? I mean, think about it. Can you really blame customers around the world for choosing France, or for choosing, well, France isn't a good example. They're probably even equally as bad, we'll say, at this kind of thing. But James Bamford's article also notes this, that companies are taking the hit here. These companies are taking the hit. And when you know that U.S. companies, small businesses, and anyone in the U.S. who offers a service can be compelled and silenced about them having to act as a spy, why would you go to an American business? As it says here, why would you buy from a company that has a back door? They'll go to a Swiss company, a French company, or they'll go somewhere else. I mean, why would they go to a U.S. company? If this passes, I wouldn't blame them for not going to a U.S. company, because this is just going to destroy U.S. companies, all for the power of the mass surveillance state. That's what I have today, guys. Make sure to share the video, like it, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you think this is going to hurt U.S. companies? Are you a business owner, and are you concerned about this kind of amendment that's going to force and compel small businesses and even individuals who run a service? They may host a website. They may, host a number of things. Do you think this is going to affect that? I do believe it's going to majorly destroy any trust left in American businesses. So that's my thoughts on it. Make sure to share it, like it, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. And I will be back later with more on how to protect your security and privacy.
We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
How it's supposed to feel.